Do I need to clean up my room at all?
No, if you looked at mine comparatively, well, it's part of why I have the blur in the background.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll work on that this summer too. Fingers crossed. Uh, all right. Well, thank you again. So I'll start with some really preliminary questions, is asking about uh, you and your background, your position here at
Yeah.
Purdue and the organizations you advise, and then get into kind of the meatier stuff about your experiences as a student club advisor.
Okay.
All right, so to start with, if you could share your name, your position, and your time at Purdue, as well as your time as a student organization advisor.
Yeah. So my name's Adam Watkins. I am Assistant Dean for Leadership Development in the John Martinson Honors College. I've been a faculty member in the Honors College since 2014, when the college got started. And before that, I was actually first a master's and then a PhD student at Purdue in the English department. And so I've been here since 2007. So it's been a fun ride, and it's one of those things where you don't, sometimes you can't imagine the places that you end up. And certainly when I moved here back in 2007, I would have never imagined that I would be assistant dean for leadership development anywhere, let alone here. My background's in creative writing and literary studies, actually. I got a BA in finance and then did finance for a couple of years after college and realized that it just wasn't really doing a whole lot for me personally, and decided to go back and get further education and things that I was really passionate about. And then when I came into the honors college, most of my classes did have sort of, they were interdisciplinary, but often had some sort of creative writing or literary studies kind of bent to them. But one of my first responsibilities was to take over and really kind of help build the honors mentor program. So this is upper level students who provide coaching to our project teams, first year students in that first year curriculum, and I just really enjoyed it. It was really clear how much growth students were getting out of that experience, and that felt really rewarding to me. And so I wanted to keep doing it. I stayed with that program until 2020, at which point I got promoted. And when I got promoted, one of the things I was asked to do is take over ODK. It had gone through a couple hands inside the honors college, and then before that, like it had even, I'd been bouncing around for a little bit. And they wanted to provide it some more stability, but also with me being my role being directly related to leadership development, it seemed to make a lot of sense that I would be an advisor for an honor society that was also focused on leadership development. So that just made a lot of sense. And that's the currently ODK is the only student organization and SAO that I advise, but I do advise in a number of other capacities. So we've got several student groups or programs in the Honors College that I play an advisory role with, or that I lead as a director, but we still give students a lot of agency in the way that we build out and the way that we execute our mission. So there's not for me like a really clear gap or difference or gap between the work that I do with ODK versus the other kinds of work that I'm doing with student organizations or programs in the Honors College.
Okay. So I'll start on a positive note with what would you say you enjoy or get the most fulfillment out of in your role as advisor?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things. The first one really is just seeing students grow. Particularly, we just had three students. Well, as of next weekend, we will have had three students that are just graduating, who have been with me since the start of the rebuild for ODK. And each of them has been an amazing student leader. And they had a ton of strengths that they brought into those roles early on. Some of them were more apparent to them than others, but all of them have grown tremendously in the process, in both with ODK, but all of them have also had other roles in other programs and things. but yeah, just like seeing the way that they've grown as leaders and as people. So for an example, one student came in to ODK. She was initially our vice president, has a sort of STEM background, and is very sort of regimented, very analytic thinker, very to the point, very task oriented. So one of the things I challenged her with after working with her for a semester was you've got like the task management side of leadership down pretty well. I'd love to see you work on community building and coaching and really making connections because I think that's a sort of the next piece to sort of build out. And in sort of like a full circle moment, she's also the sort of student co-director for a sort of service learning group that we work on together that she founded, co-founded with another student. And I asked students to say, because it was kind of her going away party, end of the year party, what things do you appreciate about this student as they're getting ready to leave in the ways that they've created this organization, giving you room to grow. And many of them talked about like creating psychological safety, creating a sense of community, like forming personal connections. So it was really lovely to see like what they were stressing was not the task oriented side of her leadership. It was all these other things that she had spent the last 3 years working on. So that, I mean, that is just a really proud moment, both for her and for myself. So those kinds of things, I think are the things where I get the most fulfillment. I also just really like working with students. Like I like accomplishing things with them. I like helping them find success, and that being a collaboration that we do together. Building out programs is really exciting. It's a lot of fun. Um, and like they're kind of fascinating social experiments, right? Like, will this thing work? Kind of experiment with this approach, right? See what happens. Like I find all of that stuff just really fun. So I think all of that's pretty rewarding.
I received my master's of science in organizational leadership, and
Okay.
it's great for me to hear that we're going to have a really good, like, ethical leader out there in the world as a result. So, thank you.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So on the flip side, what would you say you find most challenging about your role as advisor?
Yeah, so I would say the most challenging thing about the advisor role, and this is sort of and this is the one clear distinction between the advisor role and the other roles that I'm in, is as the director for leadership programs, like in the Honors College. I select the students. I get to have more control over our mission and our key objectives. And I still try to give students a lot of agency, but it's clear that that there is already kind of a sort of set structure. And that happens to some extent with ODK, but because it is a student organization, I've tried to be much more advisory rather than directing, right? Like I'm an advisor, not a director, and those are very distinct roles. And that can be challenging because there are moments where I have ideas, and I can see things that I know would help them. But I make suggestions and sometimes they follow them, sometimes they don't. Um, Sometimes they elect students because that student is the best presenter when we have the election process, but the other students don't always see all of the processes that have been happening sort of behind the scenes. And maybe really this other student is really the one that's been carrying the organization, but they're just not
Mm.
as dynamic of a speaker. You know what I mean? And it's like
Yeah.
not my place to then step in and say, no, it should really be this other student. You know what I mean? Like it's up for the students to decide themselves. So I think moments like that where it's like you want to step in, but you really got to let them do it. And those moments can be challenging.
If I can follow up with an ad lib question, in my role here as assistant director of student organization, I have sometimes seen advisors kind of blur the lines between the distinction you made, advisor and director,
Yeah.
to the point that they're almost taking over initiatives, events, uh, meetings, such. Um, how are you able to, being in a director position yourself, make that clear delineation and and make sure you step into that advisory role rather than accidentally into the director role.
Yeah, I have it's definitely involved taking like a step back in certain ways. Over the course of the 3 years that I've been with them, I've been incrementally taking sort of steps back. Whereas like I was kind of leading the meetings a little bit that first year just to sort of establish kind of this is the way they should run. But then like as the year went on, I stepped back more and more. Whereas to next year, I've already sort of given the new board a sort of um I've tried to reshape basically my role with them in terms of really positioning myself as a consultant and ideally a consultant that they should really value. Like I am a resource that should be taken advantage of. And if and this is about basically as much time as I'm going to give them each semester, each month, or whatever it is. So this is sort of our contract. And here's several ways that you can utilize that time. Here's my suggestions, but I'm also open to what your preference would be in terms of what you want to get out of this. And sort of like and sort of change the relationship because I feel like um I don't want to confuse the distinction between like our own children and students, right? Because they're very different things. But I mean, like there's also, you're trying to help people grow, and sometimes the advice that you want to give, they just don't want to hear, right? They have their own ideas about it, and the more that you try to tell them this is what you should be doing, if they don't see it, like the less they're going to be interested in doing that. So I really tried to change the relationship over the last 3 years too, right? Like if you got a problem, I'm happy to provide suggestions. And it's sort of like I can now give you a tool and you know that you need it. Whereas if I was trying to give them the tool already and they didn't know they needed it yet, they don't see the value of the tool and they don't end up using it. So I'm trying to shift that, right? Where it's just sort of like I'm the resource that they can come to, and also establish that they've got certain responsibilities to me that they need to keep me updated on specific goals and specific progress toward those goals if I'm going to do my job for them well. So we are developing a system where they will be giving me and any other faculty connected to the program reports, so that they're holding themselves accountable, but so that I understand what is happening with the overall organization. So again, trying to really change it so that they have to come to me to get what they need, and just really being explicit about those expectations and my sincere desire to help, but that it needs to be something that they want and that they're coming to me because they're actually going to hear it. And they don't have to use everything I say, but they have to come to it with a sense of having seen value in it.
Yeah, it can be a delicate balance between not wanting to be too laissez-faire, but not wanting to be over involved. And so these points are very
Yeah.
helpful.
No, totally. I mean, and the flip side of that is that you hear about a lot of student organizations where they have very laissez-faire faculty connected with them, and then the students are like, I'm not really getting a lot of mentorship. I'm not really getting a lot of coaching. So with the program that I mentioned, the Honors Mentor program, when we were doing focus groups, I did an IRB study to sort of assess what the students were getting out of it. And one of the things that came out in the focus groups a lot was what they really appreciated about that program was that we had a class connected to it for the mentors so that each week we were talking about like this is where your groups are in terms of their group development, right? These are strategies that you can utilize at this stage that will help them get to the next one. Like, and we were very good about sort of creating like an 8 week kind of arc that sort of mapped on to where the teams were. And the students said, like, I got so much more out of this than I have out of like the last 2 years of leadership roles that I've had because I finally was getting instruction. So I'm trying to provide that instruction, but again, it's got to be sort of like you got to come and get it. And if you come to ask for it, I will give you plenty of it, right? But you've got to want it. right? You've got to show a desire for it, for that mentorship, for that coaching. Because if you don't want it, then there's not really a whole lot of point in me spending time doing it.
Sure. So, on the note of resources and support you mentioned, um, what resources or support do you feel the Student Activities Organization's office or the university as a whole could maybe introduce or continue to do, or maybe modify to really help out the organizations as well as the advisors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a lot that we are already doing sort of across the sort of ecosystem, in terms of SAO, in terms of through the Roger C. Stewart Leadership and Professional Department. As I think I had students reach out to SAO from ODK because they were actually doing asset mapping and trying to get a sense of sort of what was out there. Um, and um, I think that there's a lot of stuff that's out there in terms of starting to understand competencies, starting to understand sort of personal leadership. You all have several, I think, really great workshops on getting started, on recruitment, transition, that sort of stuff, trying to cover some fundamentals. So I think there's a lot of things out there. Um, One of the things that has been valuable is we actually have a class that we offer called Leadership Praxis. It's an asynchronous class that students do with their any leadership role that they have that's not already credit bearing. And also a lot of students that end up in that class are in student organizations. But basically, it converts their leadership experience into a lab. So they're getting instruction for the first 13 weeks. They can pick whatever modules they want from like a suite of modules from different sort of leadership domains, and then work on applying that. And just having just sort of text, having concepts to work with and really intentionally try to apply to their roles, like that's gold right there in terms of their development. But it takes a structure. Like for myself, as much as I should be, and as much as I say this to students, or like for any leadership role that you're in, you should be regularly reflecting, being really deliberate about what sort of improvement strategies you're trying to implement for yourself and for others. And I try to do that, but I don't always do it as well as I should, because it's hard, I think, to create that same structure for ourselves than what we get out of classes. Right. It's, I think, why we kind of miss classes, right? Because it's like when you have somebody, have that coach, have that instructor, really ensuring that you're following through on reflecting and doing all these things. Like, I think you just get a lot out of it. So those are some things. But one of the big things that I'm interested in looking in, and if you all are interested in exploring this with me, I would definitely be open to collaborators on it. But one of the things I've been seeing more and more is a really important part of my own personal relationship with leadership is I was a really introverted kid throughout high school. Like I didn't really talk to a lot of other kids. Like I had my couple friends and that was all I really wanted. And then once I got to college, like things really sort of changed and very much sort of came out of my shell. But like in high school, like nobody was coming and tapping me on the shoulder and being like, I see leadership potential in you. You know what I mean? So I never saw myself as a leader before. And I think we have a lot of students that are like that, that are really driven and want to accomplish things, but don't think about themselves as leaders because nobody's just ever identified them as such. And maybe they're really introverted. Maybe they have anxiety. Maybe they have whatever things. But I've worked with a lot of students who are really introverted, aren't necessarily the loudest, most charismatic person in the room, do have anxiety, do have other things that make it hard for them to step into those roles, but they really want to. And when they do, they have a ton of success. It's challenging for them, but they grow so much from that experience. But again, it's part of creating that psychological safety, creating an
Mm.
environment where they feel comfortable doing that. Just had a student, a president of ODK, won the McGuffey leadership award. I keep saying that name wrong.
Oh,
Do you know the proper pronunciation?
I thought it was McGuffey's.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I think it's like McGaughey or something like that. Anyway, you'll have to edit that part for me. But she won this major award, right? But she's also shared with me that that there's been challenges for her along the way. ODK was one of the first places where she felt comfortable enough, like really stepping into a leadership role, and that there have been certain social dynamics that were really challenging for her, and we worked a lot on how to how to be successful in those spaces. And a lot of what I realized was that she was actually quite talented. She just didn't have confidence in those specific contexts because she hadn't had a lot of experience with it. So a lot of it was just sort of affirmation and then being strategic around it. But I think there's a lot of students out there who are in roles, but like just they're not getting a lot of affirmation. They're not getting a lot of coaching. But I think we're seeing younger populations increasingly dealing with anxiety. And I think that's going to be a big thing. If we really believe in this notion that all students can be leaders, I think we need to figure out how to meet them where they are and provide them that kind of support. I don't know what exactly that looks like, and part of it is doing more research into understanding what are the things that keep students that are really motivated, that are dedicated, but just they don't quite have that confidence to like raise their hand when you say, who else wants to take on a leadership role? And
Hmm.
fortunately, I've had a couple of students who like you kind of, you know what I mean? You kind of saw them start to raise their hand, and it was like, okay, you like, yes, get on up here, right? So I think that's part of it. Um, and then Yeah, I think there's several different things. One of the things that we see, and we've actually offered this to students, but I think the Boiler Challenge folks do a good job with it as well, is creating kind of activity or game-based opportunities for leadership teams in organizations to just bond a little bit more and practice their communication, and it creates opportunities for them to just talk about how they work with each other. And it's really easy to see in those moments when one person keeps dominating the group, and that becomes a moment to say, hey, like you need to leave space for others, right? Or, these two are keep sort of strategizing together, but they're not working with the rest. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of dynamics that come out in those moments, and then you can sort of provide coaching around them. And those are things that could be really valuable for student leadership teams. So we've offered some of that for students that we've already worked with in-house. I offer a class called Designing Teamwork Games, and we do a lot of that work and look at the science behind what makes teams really effective, and think through like how to utilize those kinds of activities to bolster specific skills. But I've got a student that co-founded the Student Semiconductor Association, come back and ask if I can sort of help them do some of those games for them because he sees value in terms of like what he got out of that class and trying to incorporate that into his student organization. And that's a data point of one, but we have heard from other student groups that they want to find things to help them bond a little bit more.
Yeah, I can see that. I will definitely reach out to you again, at least about the first idea you talked about, providing support to maybe introverted, maybe uh, socially anxious leaders or even potential leaders, identifying
Yeah.
individuals who may not be able to perceive themselves as leaders, uh, but upon understanding kind of a redefinition of leadership, maybe seeing themselves potentially that way too. I think would be fantastic.
Yeah, because I think, they have that you got to be the one that's up on stage that's doing the speech. That's what leadership looks like. And we know that, like, for those of us that have, done research on it or read up like that, no, it's re leadership is collective, right? Like it takes people taking on all different kinds of roles. And there's a lot of great leaders that aren't that person, but they're fantastic in other ways, right? And you can still work on that skill set. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be like just like this kind or that kind of leader, right? But I do think it's helpful because I've heard that from so many students where they were they got into a thing because they wanted to do it, but they were like, I don't know if I'll be good at this because I'm not a leader. And it's
Mm.
like, oh, you are like,
Yeah.
we are, because you stepped up and you did it. Like that's all the qualification it takes, right, to be a leader.
And I think maybe understanding that leadership can be polysynchronous as well. Like you don't have to be a leader from the morning to night. In a certain
Yeah.
context, you can pass that off. then become the follower, and being able to identify who is the leader in this particular context is a leadership quality in itself. But anyway, yeah, I don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
rant too much.
totally. Right. I mean, one of my favorite conversations that I ever had with a student, and this was going back into the mentor program, I challenged him to do like a tally of the he was mentoring this group of 8 students, and um he had identified a couple as like these are the leaders of my group, but I also noticed that like they led in the same way that he led, and I was like, I want you to look for other leaders, but I'm going to
Mm,
make you do this really objective tally. Every time somebody talks, I want to check if they talk and build on somebody else's idea. I want to circle it. If they stop and actually affirm somebody else, right, and like amplify somebody else, like I want a star. And he realized that there was actually these 2 other students that weren't on his radar at all, had a bunch of stars, right? They were doing really important sort of maintenance roles within that team in terms of amplifying the voices of others. And it was really easy to overlook because they just weren't the loudest voices in the space, but like they were doing important leadership work that was really important to galvanizing that group. And that was like a really nice moment for him where I think something really opened up for him in the way that he saw leadership.
yep, that's an important developmental point as well. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask if you had any other insights, tips, advice for staff faculty who may be brand new in their role or
Yeah.
really interested.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things that I learned that a student helped me see this year that I hadn't quite seen as much as I would have liked, or I just realized as soon as she said it, I was like, oh, that works great. Because she was really successful at balancing a lot of different, she was in a bunch of different clubs, and she had stepped into this role as she was the president of the Brain Exercise Initiative, and she had stepped into a role where she was like the regional kind of director and was helping different chapters. And she had like 17. And I was like, that's a lot on top of she was still a student, right? And I was like, how are you managing all of that? And she's like, well, actually, one of the things that's been really helpful is I got a tip from another person that I work with, that when I go into the meetings with them, I need to just really set expectations. I need to be explicit with them about what I can give them, and I need to then to ask them like, what do you need from me? Right? What do you expect from me? And then what do I expect from you in return? And once we sort of establish that really clearly, then we know what we're doing moving forward. And it was one of those things like I have asked students to do that a number of times before, but I don't know that I always do that as consistently as I need to in my own sort of advising or leadership roles because I want to oftentimes provide more support than I really end up being able to give. Or I'm there to provide support, but I get the sense that they're not, maybe don't want it as much or don't need it, right? Or they want a bunch of it, but it wasn't on my radar at all, so I hadn't really been supporting them. And I think just stopping to really have that conversation, right? What an advisor is pretty amorphous, right? So I think it's helpful to just really sit down each year with the group and say, all right, like what are our expectations? What do we owe each other? What can we give, and where is that support going to be most helpful? And that sort of ties back to what I was talking about earlier, but I just think it's so important to establish those expectations as clearly as possible, and then make sure that you live up to them.
It's a great piece. Adam, again, thank you very much for your time. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Well, I'm curious, you asked a lot of really good questions. What are the things, like from your angle, where do you see that like student groups that seem to be thriving? Like, is there something like trends that you're seeing in terms of advisors and what they do?
well, I'll go ahead and stop here, but happy to talk some more.